So we're continuing lecture 2 on prior to pregnancy, beginning with choline. And remember, what we're doing is we're covering nutrients that are particularly important for that life stage. Not that they're not all important, but these can be at risk for having low intake, and that can be a problem. So choline has a variety of functions, and this looks like a lot of words. So I'm going to distill it down as to what it matters. So choline is part of, and I know you've had nutrition and physiology, and you review it again about cell membrane structure and function. And you've learned then that phospholipids are components of the cell membrane, and a common phospholipid is phosphatidylcholine. And so choline is part of the structure of our cell membranes. It's also involved in cell-to-cell communication, and it's important. So that's a big deal. It's important for development, just like folic acid. Adequate choline is needed for closure of the notochord during development. It is also a part of the molecule, the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. And finally, maternal status is usually low. Her intake is usually low. And now choline is frequently added to prenatal supplements, and it just lets you know how important it is for people to actually take those supplements. Food sources of choline, this is my sarcastic comment all the time, is that you rarely find fortified, or you rarely find junk foods that are high in these key nutrients. What we do is when we eat whole foods, and a variety of whole foods, it's quite easy to get critical nutrients. So choline, for example, eggs have lecithin. You remember that from food science, and that lecithin helps as an emulsifier. That's why we bake with eggs and things like that. The lecithin is acetylcholine. And so, so the choline itself is part of that molecule. So it's also in these other items here. So we'll mention this again with pregnancy, but why it matters so much in studies that look at how the fetal outcomes or infant outcomes, at least in mouse and rat models, is that memory is affected by choline. So if maternal choline intake is good, the memory of the offspring is better. So it's important in development in general, but also has that key aspect of memory, enhancing memory. Another critical nutrient, and honestly, we should cover this nutrient, and we do across the entire lifespan, because omega-3 fats are often limited in the American diet, and they're critical for development, and they're also critical for other functions as well, and then have health benefits. So the requirement for omega-3 fats in the tables that you look at are typically written in the form of alpha-linolenic acid. And so this is, I'm going to remind you of this. This is the shortest chain omega-3 fatty acid. And I know you know this, omega-3 fats are essential fatty acids. They differ from omega-6 fatty acids because the first double bond from the carbon end is in carbon number 3. So that's why they're called omega-3 fatty acids. And we cannot synthesize these, so they're essential fatty acids, and they're often limited in diet. When you look up the tables, it's listed in ALA, but remember there are other forms of omega-3 fatty acids that are longer chain. We'll talk about these, but DHA and EPA are the long chain ones traditionally found in fish, and those have important ramifications. So let's keep going here. Again, what are your omega-3 fats? The table that you just saw shows the requirement for alpha-linolenic acid. And this is something to help you think through the structure of fatty acids. So this is a fatty acid formula. This omega-3 fat has 18 carbons and 3 double bonds. Because it's an omega-3 fat, the first double bond starts carbon number 3 from the methyl end. This 3 doesn't refer to the omega-3. This refers to the number of double bonds. Then you can see we have these longer chain essential fatty acids, and we'll get to those. So sources of ALA include flaxseed oil, which is not really that commonly consumed, Some people might add flax seeds to their oatmeal, but the bioavailability is not so high because the seeds often go in one end and out the other without being broken up, right? So if people grind flaxseed, they're more likely to get the oils in their diet. And flaxseed oil, you can't cook with flaxseed oil. It's very unstable and has a quick smoke point. So, but some people add it to things. Then in more commonly used oils, you can see alpha-linolenic acid is found in these. We don't list other oils than canola and soybean oil because it's virtually non-existent in other fats. So if a vegetable oil, sometimes you get a vegetable oil and you don't even know, unless you read the label, what oils those are. You wouldn't count that to necessarily be high in ALA. Canola and soybean oil are unique because they're pretty good sources. Notice olive oil is not on this list either. Okay, olive oil is not a good source. Chia seeds are one of these popular foods that people swear by, and they add them to cereals sometimes. They work as kind of a thickener. So if you were gonna, I've only cooked with them once because somebody gave me a bag, and I don't really like the texture, but they kind of work like thickeners. So if you like them, you can add them to oatmeal and things like that to up the omega-3 fat intake. Walnuts and greens have omega-3 fats, but this is the short chain. And I will continue to bring up this point. These are nice vegetarian sources, which is fine. However, the more bioactive compounds are the longer chain. Notice they've got 20 here and 22 carbons here and more double bonds. These are the more active ones metabolically, found in fish and also in supplements. And we have some foods that are fortified with DHA. You can find them in the store. Horizons milk has DHA added to it. A lot of times people use it for kids. Eggs can be have high DHA because the chicken food is fortified with a particular type of algae that makes it. And it's also in human milk. But these forms are more critical for development and harder to get in the diet. Now, this is the key thing. ALA sounds good. Here's some nice food sources. But during pregnancy, only about 9% of ALA consumed is converted to DHA. So that means if we want to have more EPA and DHA, those food sources actually need to be consumed. Most women do not consume enough omega-3 fats. Okay, I'm going to leave this slide here for a second and take a look at it, and then I'll come right back. I apologize, this may be too much information, but I have a condition called gastritis where the lining of my stomach can hurt if I'm hungry. And the pain gets so bad I can't talk anymore. So I just took another bite of something, I'll be fine in a minute, and I'll talk about that condition when I get to older adults. So here's a real life example. Okay, so this is a table that you can find online. It's put out there by the EPA and the Food and Drug Administration. And it's called What Pregnant Women and Parents Should Know, Advice About Eating Fish. So we recommend fish consumption, yet we all know that fish can be a source of mercury and be a problem. So it's very important to choose from the best sources. The recommendations are eat 2 to 3 servings a week. Good choices up to 1 serving a week, and don't consume these high mercury level foods. Really shouldn't be consumed by anyone. The safest group to consume these are men, because they're not they're not growing fetuses, right? They don't have uterus. So, but still, too much consumption of high mercury fish, no matter who you are, can cause brain damage. And the mercury can cause brain damage in the infant as well. So you might think that and go, well, maybe we should just stay away from fish. But the literature really supports eating fish as being a really helpful way to bolster omega-3 fats and also result in the highest functionality of the offspring. just to put a fine point on it, here's a slide that shows fish, omega-3 fat content, and mercury. And the red shows you why there's certain fishes that we don't recommend. And so salmon, anchovies, mackerel, these are all, look at their high in omega-3 fats, and their mercury is just really low. But then we get to bluefin, albacore, skipjack, and yellowfin tuna, and notice how high their mercury content is. So they do provide omega-3 fats, but this is a problem. Okay, so here's your other safe foods and so forth. Finally, these are your really high sources. They contain omega-3 fats, but the mercury is high. So these items are not recommended to be consumed during pregnancy and by women of childbearing years and by children. So that means tuna recommendations, people should only consume chunk white tuna, stay away from albacore and skipjack and all these others because of the mercury content. Any questions about that before I move on? I'll hit it again a little bit with the pregnancy lecture, so it won't be long. Let me talk about it again.
How many times, if someone likes to eat a lot of tuna, how many times would you say maybe that's a lot? Like if they eat it maybe like 6 times out of the week, like would you consider that very like concerning as far as mercury goes?
Yeah, I think that's too much. So twice a week, and I would go for chunk white tuna, even men. We know mercury is a neurotoxin, and I'll show some of the effects of it when I get to the pregnancy lecture, but even people that are robustly healthy, if they consume too much high mercury fish, can feel the effects of it. It can decrease muscle mass and cause distress. So twice a week.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Okay, so I won't ask you how much of nutrients are in prenatal vitamins, but it's a good idea to have an idea what's in prenatal vitamins when you're talking to people. And this is enough to hit some of these problem nutrients, as you can see. Okay, other practices. What about coffee? Coffee is a popular beverage that used to be consumed in 6-ounce cups when I was growing up, and then now they're in whatever you want, right? Buckets, you can get them from Starbucks. The recommendation prior to pregnancy is to limit the intake to 200 milligrams a day. Now, some people don't have any problem with this, but there is some potential connection with caffeine intake and miscarriage. So if someone has a history of miscarriage, then I would cut caffeine all the way out and see if that's one of the culprits. The literature always goes back and forth on this. It's not cut and dried, but it's a good recommendation. Moderation is always a good thing, put it that way. Then we get to alcohol and recreational drugs. These are sobering comments. The 50% of women have consumed alcohol during the 3 months prior to pregnancy, so it's common. And it's more common among women over 35 years of age who are also white. And so the problem here is people may not know they're pregnant and they are consuming the alcohol during the early stages of pregnancy. So that's where this really, really runs into trouble. Alcohol is a known teratogen, meaning it causes birth defects. It also causes stillbirth, preterm birth, miscarriage. So it interferes with the actual pregnancy process. We also know that pot is teratogenic, and to date we haven't been able to study this for everybody because it's been illegal. Now that it's legal in a lot of places, still not ethical to have people smoke pot to see how their kids come out, right? So we can only look at correlation data, and it's also a teratogen. People need to be careful, and it's not recommended to use recreational drugs of any kind during the reproductive years. And smoking. We'll talk more about what alcohol does during the pregnancy lecture, or if people consume alcohol during pregnancy. So smoking, some people do smoke. Some people are addicted to smoking. It's really hard for them to stop, even when they become pregnant. And smoking can affect fertility and also the entire birth process because it limits, what it does is it constricts the blood vessels in the placenta. So there's not real good transport of nutrients from the mother's body to the fetus's body. So there's not good transport of oxygen. And so that's going to end up with low birth weight and things like birth complications. The recommendation is to stop. This last slide, when we meet in person, I have more time to do this, and I feel loath to overload you with assignments, so I don't believe I will. But let me talk about this a little bit, and I have a fantastic video posted for you to take a look at. And I know you talk about things like epigenetics in your genetics class, but I still want to bring a point here. So just to remind you, chromosomes unravel, right? They unravel when we replicate our DNA and also when we make messenger RNA, right? And so the DNA unravels. And what part of the DNA that unravels is determined by little chemical tags. These chemical tags, methyl groups and other groups, can either loosen part of DNA that corresponds to a gene or tighten it so that it's not read. Okay, so a loose area is going to be read by a ribosome and produce messenger RNA and produce proteins. So what part of the DNA is unbound determines what that cell does. So a liver cell only produces things that liver cells produce. Skin cells produce things that skin cells produce, right? So we turn on the same DNA is in both kinds of cells, but we turn on and turn off gene expression depending on the cell type. Makes sense. It turns out that our diet and lifestyle can affect how many of these tags are on our DNA. And that means that our diet and lifestyle can affect what proteins we make. This gets very interesting because the proteins that we make can have effects on all types of factors of our body, including our immune response, our ability to fight cancer, and gain weight, and I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. So our diet and lifestyle can affect gene expression, and some of this is heritable. So what that means is what you eat prior to conception can influence what genes are turned on and turned off in the child, and that can follow even to their child. So lifestyle choices follow through. So it's very, very interesting information. The video is really easy to understand. If you have any interest in looking into this at all, this is critically important. It makes a really good argument for two things. One is several things. One is plan for pregnancy. Try not to have it be accidental. However, if you're engaging in activity that can cause pregnancy, be as healthy as you possibly can for the pregnancy, but also for yourself. These lifestyle choices can affect DNA transcription and your entire health. So the whole concept of epigenetics refers to heritable changes in gene expression, and they refer to the attachment. Epi means over the gene, so it refers to the attachment of these methyl groups over the gene. Any simple questions about this? It's a fascinating topic. What this means is if you have two, and the movies go into this, if you have identical twins at birth, let's say their DNA and their epigenome are, their DNA is identical. Their epigenome is identical. But as they go through life, their epigenome changes. The younger they are, the more they're the same. And as they grow, they can become different. One of them can get cancer, the other one might not get cancer. And this may have to do with factors that sometimes we know about, like, not being overweight and exercising and so forth, and dietary composition. So how we live our lives can affect our longevity and health. I think you know this, but this gives you a mechanism for it instead of just knowing that it happens. Now I'm open for questions.
I don't have a question so much as a comment. This made me, going backwards to the alcohol consumption during pregnancy, it reminded me of when I was pregnant and I met this lady who was stationed in Germany when she was pregnant. And she said that in Europe, they're a lot more lax when it comes to alcohol consumption during pregnancy. And she said that it's not necessarily encouraged, but it's perfectly acceptable for women to, like, once in a great while consume alcohol. And she kind of criticized the US like recommendations, and I was like, you're like, okay, that's fine. Have you heard about that at all?
I absolutely have. I have a German daughter-in-law, and I've gone traveling in Europe with pregnant people and witnessed that, and it's difficult for me. And here's the deal. This is such a common thing in nutrition, where people say, I don't believe that alcohol is a problem because I consumed alcohol when I was pregnant and my kid's fine. Don't y'all hear that argument about whatever? People make that argument without evidence, without doing the statistics, without having a well-designed study. It's their personal feeling. My life worked out this way, therefore it's okay. The problem is there's lots of evidence that shows that alcohol can absolutely affect development. Now, the thing is, we don't know if there's a limit. What if half a glass of wine once a week is perfectly safe? It could be. I'm not going to say one way or the other, but what I do know is that as the alcohol exposure goes up, or via binge drinking or something, what that's going to do is increase risk for birth defects, including mental, cognitive, emotional, as well as physical effects. So, you know, I can get kind of hardline about this and say, if you're gonna bring people into the world, probably making sure we maximize their brain and health functionality is more important than drinking for 9 months. And we have such a, and I know I sound preachy when I say this, but you know, when you shift from young adulthood, however that works out for you, to parenting, like the cutoff between when you're just responsible for yourself and then you have children, your life completely changes forever. You no longer are this one person that only is accountable to yourself with your health. And so you can't really be a big drinker and take care of a family anyway. And after pregnancy, the kid gets up every 2 hours for a long period of time, and it's exhausting. So it's got to change. You know, and our culture is so pro drinking, and I've even read about articles now about people drinking a lot more during COVID, and there are 25, 30-year-old women who are having cirrhosis and hepatitis from liver damage from drinking too much while they're sequestered. And so we need to do everything we can to back off of that lifestyle for people's health, and in particular during this time. So I say, because we don't know that it's safe, it's always taking a chance. And I have sat there, and I have sat there with people that are 6 months pregnant, drinking red wine, and it makes me sad, because I will worry about the potential. And then, you know, this person, the child came out fine. He's very hyperactive. He might have been hyperactive anyway. We don't know, right? We don't have, the only way to tell is if you have a perfect study, right? You can compare one group to another. Now with animals, we can do that, and we can see differences in behavior and everything, memory and everything else. But with people, we just can't do those studies. Does that get at it?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because she made that same like argument that, oh, my kid turned out fine, so I'm sure it's fine. And I was like, I'm glad your baby turned out fine, but you probably shouldn't be telling other women to do the same.
Well, the other thing about this is you don't know what fine is. You know how your kid is, right? But you don't know how your child would have been had alcohol not been part of it. And they may have had studies that support they may have higher IQ and better emotional functionality. So to me, it would be very hard to be a woman that drank during pregnancy. I would be worried all the time about the effects of that drinking I would look at that kid all the way through their life and worry that was part of that process, of the drinking process. So it's just, people need to know about this more and more. And you guys, I hear these stories all the time. Doctors, okay, well, let me do a soapbox on this. People quote their doctors all the time about health issues and about nutrition issues. Nutrition is not their lane. They know a whole lot about diagnosis and about prescriptions and subscription and prescription diagnosis. They know all about disease, but very few of them are trained in wellness. There's almost no nutritional training. And yet people say, well, my doctor said this. My doctor says it's okay for me to drink wine, so I relax while I'm pregnant. I remember hearing this. My sister, they recommended that she do that. And then they also recommended after that she didn't breastfeed because she's a lot older than me. And they thought, it'll interfere with how your breast looks. So let's don't do that. Let's just do formula. So they have this recommendation based on nothing. Yeah, that it was because it was that comment. But they based on specious things actually. But so don't give up your education and your knowledge and your lane and your training to physicians just because they're MDs, because unless they also have education and nutrition, they don't know what you know. So that's why I'm very comfortable getting on my high horse about diet and particularly things like alcohol and just poo-pooing when a doctor says, oh, this is fine. I've also known doctors that don't recommend that the kids get vitamin D, even though the American Academy of Pediatrics do it, and that recommend people start food too early, and that they don't know what they're doing, and then people follow this. So obviously, I'm getting upset. So I mean, not really upset, but I feel passionate about these things. So I want you guys to feel empowered that you have a strong education and you have the right to have your opinion and your education. And the process you're working on in your research paper, that's the same kind of thing that you would do to look up alcohol. Let's say a couple years down the line, you're a professional, you work in some environment, people want to know, well, what's the deal with alcohol? So what you do is you get on PubMed and you look up current review papers, but you don't just pick one or two, take a broad view, because there are some papers that say, here's two groups of women, these guys drank more than these. 5 years later, we look for differences in the kids and we didn't find any. So then they go, so we think alcohol's fine. There's so many things wrong with that type of study, because what if they're not looking at the right outcomes? What if they're just looking like at math scores? But what if they're not measuring for something that's very critical and they just didn't measure it? So you have to really drill down into literature, and it's a really good thing to be an expert on because people need to know more about it. So when we get to the pregnancy lecture, I'll talk less about alcohol because I've already done all my whining for the day. So this is the end of the prior to pregnancy lecture. Now we start pregnancy. And so this is the pregnancy lecture part one. There's several lectures, they're pretty short. And so this first one, we will talk about definitions that are relevant to pregnancy, and we'll address maternal physiology and nutrition energy balance. Now, what's interesting about maternal physiology is we've already talked about the placenta, but we haven't exactly talked about what that is. So we'll get into more detail about this. Okay, so we'll begin with definitions. This is a type of diagram that's found in your textbook. Sometimes they're in a different color, but they help people get their head around this timeline of pregnancy. And everyone is familiar with calling it trimester 1, trimester 2, trimester 3. And if this is the day of conception, doctors will often say, count your pregnancy from the last menstrual period. Instead of, you can know, let's say you only had sex once, and you know when conception occurred, they'll still count the pregnancy 2 weeks before that when you missed the last menstrual period. So just get your head around it and go with that, even though, and they'll measure it and they'll let you know how the growth is done. It's just how that works. It's a standard. Yeah, okay, so first trimester, notice the first 8 weeks, the termination is embryo, terminology is embryo. Then the rest of it, the organism in mom is called fetus. She's not mom yet, she's a pregnant woman, she's not a mother till birth, right? So the pregnant woman, it's a fetus. At birth, then the term is a neonate, they're newborn. Preterm births occur before 37 weeks, and nobody wants to wait 42 weeks to deliver. So typically after 40 weeks, people get more aggressive about making sure that the birth happens shortly. If we didn't do anything, there's a few kids that would just hang in there too long, and the composition of placenta gets a little less robust. So Anyway, these are just some terms for you to have your head around. I also have several of them here. Again, just for redundancy, preterm term is 38 to 42 weeks. A zygote is a cell diploid, meaning 2 sets of chromosomes resulting in the fusion of 2 gametes. So it's a zygote. As soon as there's a fertilized ovum, we use the word zygote. Embryo, again, up to 2 weeks, and then so forth. We've already gone over these terms. Now, we will discuss, instead of going just by trimester, we'll talk about maternal physiology in 2 buckets. One is the anabolic phase, and the second is a catabolic phase, and I will describe each of these. So this is basically splitting the pregnancy in half. The first half of pregnancy, there is very little fetal growth. Now, what I mean by that is there's very little growth in volume. Fetus doesn't get very big during this time. Cell division happens and key critical organs are being formed, and all the nutrition is very, very critical, but the size is different, okay? That the actual growth of the fetus in terms of volume and weight. So anabolism, and I know you've heard about anabolic steroids, and those steroids people take when they try to, want to grow really big muscles, and some of them are illegal, and that's another story. But during the first half of pregnancy, we call it anabolic because her growth in her tissues is happening to help support the development of the placenta and the fetus. So mom can start putting on usually body water first, then tissues and so forth. So let's talk about this body water, because this is very interesting. She is developing a new organ, which I'll show you, the placenta, that's going to be the interface. You can see it here, the interface between her physiology and that of the fetus. And that's where all of that communication and all that nutrition crosses over there. And in order to support this placenta and also the increased work on her heart and her entire body and her lungs, because she's supporting another person during this process, everything increases. So she needs more blood in her body. So she starts increasing first her total body water. So her weight at first may go up, and it may be fluids mostly. And she makes blood, amniotic fluid, which is the fluid that the fetus is basically bathed in, and also her extracellular fluid. So she gets waterlogged at first. Now, why that matters is it takes a while for blood cells to develop and catch up. So for a while, her blood is a little diluted. So if you took her prior to pregnancy and looked at her hemoglobin, and then 2 months into pregnancy and looked at her hemoglobin, the levels are lower because she's got all that extra fluid in her. After up to 3 months, then she'll catch up. What this does is it makes her tired. She can feel tired after the first full half of the pregnancy because her blood is just not as concentrated with oxygen carrying components to it. So they get tired a lot of times. In a perfect world, the recommendation is rest. It's not funny because women work so very hard often during pregnancy till the last second, but the recommendation is to be able to rest. Sometimes, and then energy comes back after this, so it's good for people to know that it's temporary. When energy comes back, people sometimes feel better than they've ever felt before. People feel this is a burst of energy, and they're grateful to not be where they were. Okay, so tissues, we also are increasing our fat stores and our carbohydrate stores. And along with this is increased appetite. So she starts developing the placenta, which I'll talk more about. Okay, here we go. So here's an image of a picture of a newborn, and they have the umbilical cord still attached to the placenta. This is what was found right here in the uterus. This is a little diagram of it. And typically what happens right after birth, y'all know, everybody knows about cutting the cord. One thing I don't know if I've brought this up or not, but there's new information that indicates that it's better not to cut the cord that minute at birth, but to allow the cord to stop pulsing, because it will stop pulsing. Now remember, right before birth, they're getting all their oxygen and everything from this. And once they are born and they can get out, they cry, and you can see that their lungs are working, then this becomes superfluous. But now most people allow the cord to stop pulsing before they tie it off. And the cool part about that is that may ensure that the fetus, or it's now a baby, right? Now it just became an infant, that the infant now has better iron stores. So if more, this is a conduit for iron, and so if he can have more iron, if we wait till the umbilical cord, just a couple minutes. Usually we don't have them born and have them stuck with the placenta on them. This is just for illustration purposes. So placenta is a new organ. It weighs a couple, 3 pounds. It's a barrier to harmful substances, fights infections, provides nutrients and oxygen to the fetus, removes waste, secretes hormones that maintain the pregnancy, and such as progesterone and estrogen. Those help maintain the pregnancy, and so it remains viable. Another one is human chorionic gonadotropin. This is a hormone. We talked about this last time when we talked about nutrition prior to pregnancy. This is produced in very early stages of placental development, and this is the hormone that is part of the pregnancy test. So when people get those little strips and then they provide the first urine of the day, typically if there's a positive test, it's because her urine has this hormone in it, which means she's got a placenta. She's got a placenta, she's pregnant. So that's how the basis is. Now, I have the word cake here to remind me to say this because people sometimes ask this question. I've heard that the placenta is good to save and eat or make supplements out of. And so they always ask those questions. And from what I have seen, there's absolutely no magic, no reason to eat this particular organ. There's not some magical thing involved in this organ. Animals eat their placenta, but typically they're eating it because the scent of the placenta can draw predators. So they want to get rid of the blood evidence, right, of the birth. So they're not eating it because it's got magical properties either. And also there's been some cases where people have gotten sick and gotten bacterial infections and so forth from making supplements out of it. So I'm just not in that kind of mood. There's very few researchers that look into this. Now, there is one thing that you need to know is that and I'll show you this better on the next slide, but there's no mixture of her blood and the fetus's blood during pregnancy until delivery. So in here, the fetus's blood vessel is a closed system, and this is the maternal part, and this is her blood vessels, but then the blood pulls around the fetus's blood vessels, but they don't mix together. It's not like you have a section and then the blood is stirred up. So that's why a baby can have one type of blood and the mom can have another type. And also without the mixing, she may be able to be HIV positive and not transfer HIV to the fetus. Now, when blood does get mixed is during the birthing process, because this starts to come off. And often when in the birth canal, mom may tear, so the fetus can be exposed to mom's blood, and that way, in fact, mom often does tear. We have pretty big babies these days. So typically, if someone's HIV positive, then they'll schedule a surgical delivery so that this doesn't happen. So let's take a closer look at the placenta. And this is a blow up of that interface. So this side and here, this is the umbilicus or the umbilical cord. And you can see these are the blood vessels coming from the fetus. And again, I just want to emphasize the fact that they have little blind sacs there, but not mixing. So the maternal blood is shown here with the blue. So there's a membrane separating the blood vessels and the maternal blood. And this is the critical part of how nutrients get across. So these are very active membranes that pump nutrients across, get rid of waste products and so forth. Now, the critical hormones, we already mentioned these. Progesterone, growth of breast and intermediate tissues. And because progesterone stays pretty high during pregnancy, at least in the beginning, it also, notice that it maintains promotes lipid accumulation, and it loosens the joints. Sometimes women are a little at risk here if they're doing real jumpy, active type activities. And she might want to be a little smoother in her exercise during this time and not play like tackle football, things like that, for obvious reasons, but so because she wants to protect herself. Estrogen also supports the uterus and the breast and circulation and lipid storage. So these are supportive, and Instead of me asking you a big list of what they do, I want you to know they're supporting the pregnancy. They're supporting the growth of the pregnancy and the maintenance of the pregnancy. You may not know this, but progesterone is really required for the maintenance of pregnancy. And often this is measured along with HCG in those early stages when people do a test and they go, I'm pregnant, then they go to a healthcare provider and they do a blood test, and that verifies that pregnancy. They'll look for HCG, and they'll also look for progesterone, because progesterone, we need enough progesterone to maintain the lining of the uterus. Some women have low levels, and it's one of the causes of miscarriage. These are not nutrition things, I'm just telling you because it's kind of interesting. So, but what they may do then is provide progesterone. There are progesterone suppositories for women that she uses vaginally, and she can use that for a couple of months and that can help maintain pregnancy if that's the problem. And remember the human chorionic gonadotropin, we talked about this, that's responsible for the pregnancy test. Okay. So that's the end of anabolism. And basically what's going on is mom's tissues are being increased. She's growing a placenta. She's storing more nutrition. And the fetus isn't growing that much in volume. The second half is when things change. So often we think of women as not showing much during the first part of pregnancy. That doesn't mean she's doing something right or something wrong. It just depends on the individual. The second half, she should be changing she should look different because the fetus needs to grow. So catabolism, what happens here is we start breaking down maternal tissues more. So her diet and then her tissues can help support the growth of the fetus. So catabolism is a breakdown. So some of this fat and carbohydrate that she stored can become readily available for the fetus. So her blood sugar goes up, and her blood sugar stays up because, and this is important, glucose is the preferred fuel of the fetus. Whatever you do with your notes, make sure you focus on this. So 50 to 80% of the fetal energy needs are met by glucose. So what do you think happens if someone is dieting during pregnancy?
Can the fetus feel stressed?
Yeah, and they're also not going to grow. Without the fuel, the growth is going to be impaired. What if mom is diabetic and her blood sugar is very high? Well, this is just a guess. What do you think might happen?
Is it going to go even higher?
The fetus, there's a couple of things that can happen. One, I mentioned this last time, is that diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, can actually be teratogenic, which means it causes birth defects. And also, if her blood sugar is high, too high, often the fetus grows too much. And that's where you end up getting those 10, 12, even, I believe that, I don't know what the exact record is, but people have given birth to 16-pound babies before, and that's just not okay. So that's one of the downside of being diabetic. During the second time, her body adjusts to the fluid, and she feels more like exercising. And towards the very end, she may not feel that hungry as she was during the growth sections. Okay, so this next section is on energy balance. This is a fun fact. During COVID, I've always been a pretty good cook. During COVID, I decided to get really good at it because there was something to do, right, while we were home for a year and not seeing anybody. So I took a picture of most of my dinners every night. All right, so this is just one of my dinners. Neither here nor there, but this is, to me, this is an example of a pretty healthy meal. Somebody gave us heirloom tomatoes, which made all the world of difference. Okay, so our recommendations for maternal growth have to do specifically with what's the best outcome for her and for the fetus, or for the infant at birth. We want healthy weights. We talked about this before. Babies that are too small at birth, they're too large at birth, face problems. So we're kind of looking for a sweet spot. So we want mom to gain enough weight to support the pregnancy, not too much weight, because then she's going to be stuck with excess weight after pregnancy. So it's a little bit of a dance. It's not a perfect formula, but it gives people guidelines as to what to shoot for. So these are the recommendations. If this is how much she should gain. So if she's underweight, between 28 and 40 pounds, normal, the average is 30. And you remember these cutoffs. And notice overweight, she can gain less. And in the case of women with obesity, she may be able to gain as little as 11 pounds and support the growth of a healthy infant. For a couple of decades in there, this was not the recommendation. And this is because the recommendations were all about making sure that the fetal outcome is okay. But it turns out that she doesn't need to gain that much weight in order for that to happen. And having a woman who's experiencing obesity try to gain 35 pounds hurts her health enormously. So she's, she's got two things going on there. She's growing another human, and she's also maintaining her own health. So this allows us for a little bit of moderation here. Now, during the first trimester, a pound a month is typical, not more than 5 pounds, because remember, that's the anabolic phase where she's starting to grow and accumulate tissue and some water and stuff, but she hasn't gotten that big yet, and a lot of this has to do with fluid. And then after that, then the fetus starts actually getting bigger and bigger and more amniotic fluid, and then we see the big weight gain. So rule of thumb is about a pound a week up into normal, and then you want to go lower for people that experience overweight and obesity. What I like to ask on exams is this average for normal, that it goes down, upper recommendations go down with overweight. And the lowest amount recommended is for an obese woman is to gain 11 pounds. Notice there is not a recommendation for gaining nothing. Okay, she needs to gain weight. Where's all this weight coming from? The infant itself, if we're looking for the middle of the road healthy weight, let's give it 8 pounds. Then here's where all that other weight comes from. Remember, the placenta is a couple, 3 pounds. Blood, this is a fluid that's going to go away. Uterus and supporting muscles, breast tissue, amniotic fluid, her own fat, and then here's your total. So one of the fun things about pregnancy is the day of birth, people lose about 15 pounds because they lose this, and they lose a bunch of this. And so it happens quickly, okay? But I like you to know the components of weight gain in pregnancy, because women, we have such a weight gain phobia in this country. People are uncomfortable and they feel like some women feel like they shouldn't gain weight. It's some kind of sign of weakness and they need to maintain their leanness. And actually, this is not the time. You can be healthy, but this is not the time to try to restrict the development of fat storage for the pregnancy, because that doesn't serve the mom or the fetus. And if they understand that what the components of this weight gain is, it's a little bit easier for people to accept, oh, I'm going to need to gain 30, 35 pounds. So it's good to know this. Now, what can affect weight gain during pregnancy? There's several factors. One is some people have excessive nausea and vomiting. I've worked with several people that were pregnant while serving as a lecturer, and it's all they could do to show up. One of my colleagues was green for 5 or 6 months. She was so miserable. She had so much trouble keeping things down. She would eat even snack foods, pretzels, things like that would help her from throwing up. Some people just have morning sickness, but some people have this condition, hyperemesis gravidarum, in which they can't stop throwing up. This is a hospitalization problem. So often they need to have an IV to make sure they get enough nutrition and be able to have medications to stop them from doing this. But it's just it's an awful thing. Another factor, if the fetus isn't growing, she may not gain that much weight. And I talk about factors that affect fetal growth, but sometimes they're genetic factors, and it's nothing that she's doing. It just has to do with that particular individual. Psychosocial issues, people worry about, we've already talked about all this stuff. Medical issues, she can have a severe infection. And she may be exercising very heavily. Some people, again, because of our health culture, we have this juxtaposition of having one of the highest obesity rates in the world, and yet lots of eating disorders, and then a whole lot of fears and self discomfort at not fitting an ideal that almost no one fits. It's very hard to navigate these things and just be a healthy person. And for some people, it can be very difficult. Finally, food insecurity. There are a number of individuals that are food insecure in our nation. Some of that's going to go down with the new stimulus package, because families with children are going to get more money, so they'll be able to buy more food. But food insecurity absolutely affects growth of the fetus. So people want to know, what can I do? I really don't want to gain 10 to 35 pounds and then gain, and then have a permanent number of pounds after that. So typically we retain 6 to 7 pounds 12 months later. Not everybody does this. Everybody's different. Some people get down to their birth weight early on. I was down to my birth weight with my first child because I was a runner. I had a big baby. She was 9 pounds, so I didn't underfeed her. I ran every day. I ran for like 30 years. I ran every day. So I ran during the pregnancy, and she was born at about 9 pounds, and I only had 3 pounds over about 4 weeks after that, or something. She was kind of amazing. And then the second kid, I swear, I'm going to still have that fat. Okay, so a lot of times the second pregnancy is harder, and so I gained much more weight during that time, and that's been weight that's always wanted to stick. And there are some explanations for this, where the lipoprotein lipase and other enzymes and hormones and so forth can affect your energy balance. So you don't have the same body you have as a young woman. You have a body that changes from childbirth, and that's okay. Where we worry about the weight gain is to make sure her health is protected. So long-term weight retention affects long-term health. And what's interesting is people often, if they gain, let's say 10 pounds and keep it on, and then they continue to gain incrementally, you can gain real slowly, and then you don't really realize it. You add another 5 pounds and another 10 pounds, and we need to be careful about that because it does have such an effect on our health. And if she wants to have more children, then she doesn't need to start later pregnancies with greater body weight for her health and for the health of her fetus. So usually this weight is in the abdomen. There's more common weight retention, low income, Western diet, and all of these things, inactivity, and not breastfeeding very long. Breastfeeding can help. Don't think it's perfect. Breastfeeding can help, but some people, when they're breastfeeding, they're so hungry that they actually eat more than they would if they weren't lactating. So this is an issue, and this is a great area of professional area for interventions. So how many calories is she supposed to consume? So first trimester, really nothing. This is the DRIs. The second trimester, and these numbers drive me crazy, by the way, because I think they should round them off, because what does that 2 mean? But here we go. So the second trimester, 340 calories a day, and the third, 452. So this is one of the fun pieces about being pregnant. You actually get to eat more. Now, people use the phrase eating for 2. What that doesn't mean is a second piece of chocolate cake, right? Even though that sounds like fun, because that's going to hurt her health and all the things you know about. But it means she can have greater portions of foods. And so if those come from healthful foods, then that can really make a difference. She needs regularly scheduled meals so her blood sugar stays normal. And this is a graph that shows, what are we doing with all those calories? So here's the fetus here. Okay, here's 40 weeks, so weeks of pregnancy. So you can see, remember, the fetus doesn't grow that much in the beginning, and then it starts to grow here. But look at this other stuff. Her heart, increased cardiac work, increased respiratory work. Here's some of your added tissues. So those calories, she's burning more calories, and she needs them. People often want to know what the recommendations for exercise during pregnancy are. In almost all cases, exercise is recommended. Swimming is an obvious one because of the lack of stress. Here's the guidelines. All healthy women, and notice it's healthy pregnant women, should get at least 2 hours and 30 minutes of moderate intensity, aerobic activity per week. preferably spread throughout the week, and engage in moderate strength training. So in a perfect world, you enter the pregnancy, you're used to weight training, you continue doing the same thing. You don't start doing a new regimen of core activities out of the blue. Okay, so maintaining your weight lifting regimen is fine. If people are habitually habitually engaged in vigorous intensity activity or active before pregnancy, then they can keep doing this. It's a good idea to talk to the healthcare provider, but I will say you can continue to have vigorous intensity activity, but you want to make sure that you can breathe. You don't want to engage in anaerobic exercise where you run as fast as you can. You want to be able to carry on a conversation so that there's getting enough oxygen to the fetus as well. Okay, so recommendations, yes, exercise. So there's benefits and there's cautions. The benefits are absolutely incredible. Weight maintenance, world of difference. It helps her with depression, she feels more energetic, it helps control diabetes, it reduces back pain and constipation. The constipation is one of the biggest problems with pregnancy because once a fetus grows so much, the organs get sort of smashed and pushed by the wayside, and laxation is not that easy after that. And so sometimes she may risk constipation. It lowers the risk for premature delivery and offers protection from having high birth weight babies. So there's so many benefits. Daily activity is strongly required or recommended. For those who tire easily, she does not need to be out of breath, so take it slow. Glide. This is not the time to, I'm a pickleball person. I don't think I'd play pickleball while pregnant because you can fall. Right? So there's certain things you don't really want to do risk things. Be aware of the target weight. You don't want to not make that weight because of extra exercise. Drink fluid. Don't get too hot. I'll talk about this later too. Overheating on a regular basis is a teratogen. Same thing if people spend time in a hot tub. Hot tubs are not recommended during pregnancy for that very reason. You don't want our core temperature to go up. Avoid dangerous sports. No scuba diving. It's not because we're sure it's a problem, but you can't study it. And so this is not the time to dive. Sorry, I'm trying to sneeze. All right, so stop if you feel discomfort, swelling, muscle issues, and get medical advice. Some people have an issue where the placenta can separate slightly from the uterus. And this can, if it separates a lot, this can completely affect the nutrition and growth of the fetus. And if sometimes she may know this happened because she spots a little bit of blood, that's when you go and have a healthcare provider check it out. They can do a sonogram and find out if there's been some kind of split. In that case, then you don't want to be doing that vigorous exercise anymore. So it's not you do anything you want, it's be intelligent about it. I have a bunch of slides here, but I'm just going to cycle through them because you don't need to read everything. It just gives you advice. Yoga is fine, but not hot yoga. Indoor cycling is great because you're not going to hurt any of your organs or you're tearing the muscles. You're not going to fall. I find this to be the most boring exercise in the world, but walking is great. Low impact aerobics. You can do high intensity, but you might want to save those activities that are dangerous for after pregnancy. Glide, move slowly, be careful of the hot temperatures. We already talked about this. Avoid high altitudes if you're a hiker. If y'all have ever been hikers, you've done lots of hiking and you live in Central Texas, everything's flat. And you go to someplace like Colorado or Santa Fe where there's elevation and you're just not very fit until a couple of weeks because you don't have the blood cells that have been adjusted to that altitude. So your blood really can't keep up with your oxygen needs as you work your way up. So be careful about elevation during pregnancy. Okay, move slowly, don't scuba dive, you can snorkel. Okay, so that's the end of the first pregnancy lecture. And oftentimes I give you guys a little break. I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to start on the second one because I want to make sure I cover all the information during the semester. So remember, the test cutoff is before, excuse me, it's the test cutoff is at the end of prior to pregnancy, but we're going to continue on this today. So part 2, oh, that's the wrong one. Let me just do that. This is what I was looking for. So pregnancy part 2, we talk about maternal nutrition here. Calories, macronutrients, and critical micronutrients. So this is the order that we'll go in. So if you're looking back and you want to go, well, which micronutrients did we talk about? You can come to here and take a look. Calories, remember, this is repetitive because we just talked about it, but there's no increase in calories requirements during the first trimester, but then remember we have these sort of wonky numbers in the second and third trimester that there is an increase in caloric requirements. I deliberately put this in both lectures just to remind you. Now let's talk about the macronutrients. I know you've had enough education nutrition now, but you can take a look at this slide and look at the images of pictures and the pictures and notice that I don't have junk food here. It's really easy to consume too many carbohydrates in our American diet when we eat processed foods. This is much easier. So our carbohydrate intake should be about 45–65% of calories. And remember, we need carbohydrates because the primary fuel for the fetus is glucose. Right? So low carb, this is not the time for a low carbohydrate diet. So what's the recommendation? I always ask this on the exam. This is the AI. So for prior to pregnancy is 130, which is the same for all adults. And then during pregnancy, it goes up to 175 grams a day. This is where some of our extra calories need to come from. And recommendation, here's your whole foods, avoid the processed foods, which can make her blood sugar go up and increase the fatness of the babies. If she's gluten-free, then she can choose non-wheat, barley, and rye items. And her fiber should be her DRI, which is 28 grams per day. Bear in mind, with the average American diet, our fiber intake is really low. With the problems of constipation, this may be a real problem for her, so getting that fiber is a really good idea. What do we need protein for? Just throw something out there.
Tissue development.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, think about how much protein is in your body, right? You've got muscles, you've also got your enzymes, regulation, right? You regulate your entire growth process by enzymes. So a lot of hormones contain protein in them, neurotransmitters, cell structure and function. Protein is integral to everything that we need. And there's 3 ways to calculate the requirements. We asked this too, so you can do it quickly. If you remember adults, for a non-pregnant adult, the requirement for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram. So you start out and you go, convert their pounds to kilograms, and then you multiply 0.8 grams times their kilograms. And then you add 25 to that. So it's 25 more than their DRI. Another is 71 grams per day, and another is 1.1 grams per kilogram. There's 3 ways to calculate this. So it's about 25 more grams per day. What you probably know about the American diet is we have plenty of protein. The average intake of the US pregnant woman is fine. She actually consumes a little more. You have learned the exchange system in some of your early classes. In other words, how much protein, carbohydrate, and fat in particular foods. So this is a little reminder for the protein content of foods. So milk contains 8 grams of protein per cup, cheese 7 per ounce, even bread has some protein, and eggs. Each egg is about 7, and an ounce of meat, chicken, or fish just 7. and beans is 13 grams per cup. It is so easy to get adequate protein intake. Even watch it from a vegetarian diet, you can leave these things out, and then you eat beans, you can see where you can get there. Vegan diet's harder. The vegetarian diet, or lacto-ovo vegetarian diet is pretty easy. So let's get to this issue of vegetarian diets. And I believe this is a good stopping point, as I know I've been talking quite a bit, and you may have reached information overload. So I'm going to stop my share here. Stop the recording.